All right, we ended up last week by talking about LSD and the symptoms and all that kind of business, and we told you that Albert Hoffman experimented with himself, and because of the fact that he couldn't get a handle on it, so to speak, or control it, he referred to LSD, his discovery, as his problem child. Anybody want to guess who the first organization was that used LSD in the United States?
The government.
What part of the government?
Military.
Close.
The Air Force.
Well, that's the military. What? Who's somebody say over there? What'd you say? Aaron, what'd you say? What'd you say? Yeah, who used it for truth serum interrogations? CIA. So the first people in the United States to use LSD were the CIA. And they used it to interrogate enemies of the state to try to get them to tell the truth, and found out that it really didn't work that well. Okay? So we talked about this. So it was first banned in the United States in 1965. What state was the first to ban it? Because they even had a concert in Haight-Ashbury called the Love Pageant Rally to protest that. California. So the first state to ban LSD was California in 1965. And then eventually LSD became illegal in all 50 states. And hasn't made the comeback like marijuana has. You don't hear a lot about people abusing LSD today. I think it's kind of made its run. I guess we're into methamphetamines and stuff like that, I don't know. But LSD has not made much of a comeback. Now, a very popular drink for the youth culture in the 1960s was referred to as electric Kool-Aid. And it was simply the mixing of LSD and Kool-Aid as you know it today. It was so popular, I have a book back there called, well, I'll show it to you real quick. I have a book that was written by Tom Wolfe, totally about this whole experiment with Kool-Aid and LSD. And Tom Wolfe wrote this book in the 60s called The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which was a book that was dedicated to the use of LSD and Kool-Aid. There's the guy that wrote it. Looks like an abuser. Okay? Okay? So, it was very, very popular among the youth of America. Now, two particular people became big advocates of LSD and tried to convince people it was the way to go. Two people. The first one was this fellow right here. His name is Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey. Now, he's probably most known as a writer, and he wrote a book called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now, you guys are probably too young, although Julie Warren just asked her father, and he had heard of this. It was later developed into a very, very popular movie starring Jack Nicholson. I don't know if you know who Jack Nicholson is, the actor, but he was the main character, and it was about an insane asylum in which he went in there because he was a continual criminal, and they got tired of messing with him, so they put him in this insane asylum, and he was kind of going against the grain, and these people that were committed were having fun, and they got tired of his nonsense, so they started giving him shock treatments and screwed him up. The point of the movie is you go in there, it's halfway sane, and come out totally insane. That's the whole point of the movie. But I'm sure if you ask your parents, or at least your grandparents, have heard of the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Well, this book, I just happen to have a first edition, first printing, which is worth a lot of money. I haven't even taken it out of the slipcase, nor have I ever opened it, just so you know. So anyway, this is the book he wrote, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was really very, very popular and was later made into a movie. And he was a guy that promoted LSD. Probably the weirdest guy, the most visible guy that promoted LSD in the 60s was this fellow right up here, Timothy Leary. Very tough signature to get. He signed that actually on April Fool's Day of 1979. But anyway, there's Timothy Leary. He has an interesting past. I don't necessarily think you need to write all this down if you just get the idea. He was a psychologist who taught as a professor at both the University of California, Berkeley, and Harvard. Okay, very successful professor of psychology. And he was an interesting guy. You don't have to write this down, but he was born in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1920. He actually attended the United States Military Academy in West Point and served in the armed forces in World War II. And he got back and earned his doctorate degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and as I mentioned, taught psychology at both Cal Berkeley and Harvard. And he was actually conducting legal experiments with drugs in his classes in the 50s and 60s. Now, that was probably okay to conduct those experiments in front of your students, but what happened in 1963 while he was teaching at Harvard, he started using his students in his experiments with these hallucinogenic drugs. The university powers found out about it and they fired him. Okay? And then he really went out on a tangent to try to convince people the great benefits of LSD. He even started his own church, his own congregation of followers, his own special church. Now, I don't know about all you guys' churches, but the churches that I've gone to in my life, usually the pastor welcomes everybody and says, now would you please pass the peace? And you would say, well, God, nice to see you, man. I hope things are going good. And then you'd turn and go greet people. He passed peace by passing marijuana joints. So they were really passing the peace, if you know what I mean. So that's what he did. He just had a weird way of religion. And he would always tell the youth of America, turn on, tune in, and drop out. That was his advice to the youth of America. Turn on, tune in, and drop out. Well, what did he do with his life after he got fired at Harvard? He began to write books, and he began to go out on the lecture tour, and made a lot of money as a guest lecturer during his life. He spent the last 20 years of his life writing books and lecturing across the country about the 60s and his promotion of LSD. He finally died of prostate cancer in 1996, and he had in his will that part of his remains were to be cremated and launched into space, which they were in 1997. So he was a different duck, and he was very much a promoter of LSD. Now, you guys are getting, if you talk to your grandparents, maybe your grandparents would know who Timothy Leary is. I don't know. Maybe your great-grandparents, if they're alive, would. But we're getting in this point where I used to say your parents, not your grandparents, not your great-grandparents. But anyway, Timothy Leary was a big, outspoken advocate of LSD in the 1960s. Okay, the seventh thing that resulted in violence in the 1960s was the rise of motorcycle gangs. The rise of motorcycle gangs. It's kind of an interesting history about motorcycles. You know, I owned a Harley-Davidson for years. I had one the first few years I was here, but I couldn't really find anybody that was into it. But when I was in Montana, just about every weekend it was nice. 5 or 6 of my buddies would take off. We'd go on a 100-mile motorcycle ride. You know, camaraderie, companionship, raise a little hell. Anyway, we used to do that. It was kind of fun. Okay? Well, this motorcycle business started in America right after World War II. Because World War II ended, we had a big surplus of military motorcycles, and they began to sell those, and people began to buy them. To give you an idea how popular it got, prior to the end of World War II, they predicted that about 200,000 people in this country had motorcycles. After World War II, shortly afterwards, over 1 million. So people got into motorcycles after World War II because they were available. The Army was selling all these motorcycles they had developed and were using during the war. People bought them. And then other companies said, hey, this is a pretty good deal. So they started developing motorcycles. Now, Harley-Davidson, although they were ahead of the game, I think, don't quote me, but I think they started like 1914 with Harley-Davidson motorcycles. They weren't like they are today, but it's been a long-standing company. They really blossomed from this, as you can imagine. But anyway, that's when motorcycles came. Well, once these people got a hold of motorcycles, they started doing kind of like what I was telling you on the weekends. They'd get together and they would form these motorcycle groups. And they might even call themselves the Wild Hogs or something, if you've seen that. But that's the typical example of guys got together and were, they call themselves this or that. And so it happened, it started happening. Well, what happened is some of these motorcycle groups did the right things, and some of these motorcycle groups did the wrong things. And probably the best example of this occurred on July 4th of 1947 in Hollister, California. So on July 4th of 1947, an event happened in Hollister, California that kind of shows you the good from the bad in these motorcycle groups. 1947. 43. Or did I say 47? 47, yeah. July 4th of 1947 in Hollister, California. Now, what happened is a group called the American Motorcycle Club was sponsoring a hill climb at Hollister, California. They even have these today. They have one in Billings. It's like really big. Anybody ever heard that? Yeah, they have the hill climb in Billings. It's a big deal. People come from all over to watch these motorcycles head up these hills and see if they can conquer the hills. Well, when they had this motorcycle climb sponsored by the AMC in 1947, lots of motorcyclists came. And some came to participate, right? And some came to just kind of watch and have a good time. Well, during this event, some of them got out of control. And the head of the American Motorcycle Club was very upset because he thought every motorcyclist was getting a bad rap, and he publicly stated, now listen, don't hold against all of us what 1% of the people are doing. And he referred to these bad actors as 1%ers. Okay, don't get after us because of the 1%ers. Well, sometimes if you're a bad actor and somebody gives you a nickname that isn't too awful, what might you do with that nickname? Embrace it. And all of a sudden, these bad motorcycle groups began to embrace the idea that I'm a 1%er, and they even started wearing 1% patches. And you can see them if you go to Sturgis today, guys will have jackets on and say 1%er on it. Okay? Now, one of these groups of 1%ers, they developed their own gang, and excuse my language, and referred to themselves as the Pissed Off Bastards. That's what they called themselves, was the Pissed Off Bastards. This was simply a group of these 1%ers that were kind of hellraisers. And we all laugh, oh God, that's funny, the Pissed Off Bastards, what a name. Well, that particular group, the Pissed Off Bastards, revolutionized in this country as the Hells Angels. And that's what they're known as today, the Hells Angels. Have you ever heard of them? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about the Hells Angels. Anybody know where the first chapter of the Hells Angels sprung up in 1954? First chapter. If you ever see Hells Angels, and if you go to Cody this summer, they'll be there. They always are. They have their colors, which is their Hells Angels emblem, and then they'll have a patch on it that'll say, you know, San Jose, Kansas City, tells you where they are from. Where was the first group originate? Anybody know? California somewhere. Where? Oakland. Very good. Oakland, California. And the man that started the first chapter was a fellow by the name of Sonny Barger. Sonny Barger. I just happened to have a picture of Sonny right up there, to the left of Harry Truman. Picture I took in Sturgis. Now, if you don't recognize the guy to Sonny's right, I wouldn't be surprised. Would you like to hear the story behind that? Yeah, so when I was teaching in Roberts, Montana in 2000, this class, kids had to do a term paper. And Brent Waller, one of my students, a little risky guy, he wanted to do his paper on the Hells Angels. But he didn't have any research on it. You can't find a lot of research on the Hells Angels. So at that time, things were different. So I knew that Sonny Barger lived in Cave Creek, Arizona. So I got and dialed 1-555-1212 and Sonny please, Cave Creek, Arizona, number please, Sonny Barger. Hold on, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, here's the number. So I called it. Brent was sitting next to me, I called it. Lady answers the phone, hello. I said, yeah, Sonny Barger there. Just 1 minute. So the next thing I know, here's the guy on the phone. Sonny, this is Sonny Barger. Hey, my name's Randy Durham, a history teacher over in Montana. I got a boy here that wants to do a report on the Hells Angels, and he's looking for some research. Put him on! Talked to him probably 45 minutes. Brent wrote the greatest paper I've ever seen of the Hells Angels. So anyway, we let it go, and he said, hey, if you ever get in the area, you stop by, okay. You know, because this guy is really a felon. I mean, he's a criminal, right? So anyway, in 2006, my wife and I decided, before I decided than her, we decided a trip to Sturgis would be in order. So we called this other couple friend of ours who has been there before, and we go to Sturgis. Pretty interesting thing to watch in Sturgis. The best bet is to park your motorcycle and go sit on the park bench and watch. But anyway, we were walking downtown, and I noticed this, what used to be an empty store, like you see some of these in Orland that are empty now. And all of a sudden it had a big sign, Hell's Angels, paraphernalia for sale. And they've got all kinds of patches and all kinds of stuff. Like this particular patch here you could purchase. Red and white supporter. Okay? So I walk in there and these guys are looking a little rough. And my wife is about to pass out. I walk in there and they said, what can I do for you? You know, they're really gruff, you know, and they said, is Sonny Barger here? Who's asking? I said, well, listen, my name's Randy Durr. I'm a teacher in Montana, and he helped one of my students write a paper. Is there any possibility I might be able to see him? Let me check. So they walk all the way back, this huge hallway, all the way back to the store, walk all the way back, and the guy says, Sonny said he'd see you and your wife. I said, well, what about these people who are with us? Well, he'll see them too. They put 2 guys on each side of us and marched us back to the back like they were guarding the President of the United States. And I get back there, and I'm expecting kind of a gruff fellow, or I'm not thinking, geez. And he stands up. Now, he had some cancer, throat cancer, and so he has to put, at that time, he had to push on a button to talk. And he's back there, and there he is. And he says, I am so glad to meet you. He says, I've always wondered how that went with that kid. And he was the nicest man I've ever met. The guy is a murderer, he's a drug seller, he's a money launderer. But I mean, I'm telling you, this guy was as nice. I bet you we sat back there and talked for 30 minutes. There was a guy from Time magazine doing an interview with him, and a photographer. He put him on the side, talked to us probably about a half hour, took some pictures. He signed a book he wrote called Hell's Angel. To Randy Durr, thanks for all you have done, Sonny Barger. I have it at home, it's one of my prized possessions. Anyway, he signed another book for me, and I cut that out of the book and put it up there. But that is the man that runs the Hell's Angels. Now, to finish the lecture part of this, he starts the first chapter in Oakland. This thing has metamorphosized into chapters all over the world. Japan, Europe, everywhere. And what they do, basically, they're a business. They sell and use illegal drugs. They hire muscle and provide security at events. They launder money. All the stuff they do leads to violence. They came into Haight-Ashbury and were a big part of the problem of getting everybody hooked on drugs during the time of, we talked about Haight-Ashbury. They will be in Cody sometime this summer, and they'll beef up security, but basically they just try to leave these people alone. Now, this is another story. I'm in Sturgis the same year. We meet him, I'm just excited. We drive to Deadwood, right? We don't get in Deadwood 20 seconds and you hear gunshots. We're not in there 20 seconds. Bang, 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 bang. Well, what happened is some of the Hells Angels got in a gunfight with the Banditos, which are supposed to be some bad motorcycle group, and a couple guys got shot, nobody killed, but they had a little shootout while we were in Deadwood, so you never know what's going to go on. So it was really interesting, but my point is that these motorcycle gangs, like the Hells Angels, really helped create violence in the 1960s, although Sonny Barger is one of the nicest guys I've ever met, so I don't think I'll take a ride with him anytime soon. Okay? I will tell you that a guy by the name of Hunter S. Thompson, an author, in the 1960s, spent a year with the Hells Angels. Sonny Barger let him hang out with them for a year, and he wrote a book, a very rare book, and some of the things that he writes about that happened, people getting killed and him almost getting killed. I will tell you one more thing. The Rolling Stones did a concert at Altamont Space Raceway in California, and they hired the Hells Angels to be their security guards, and they ended up beating up a young black guy to death. And one of the guys went on trial for that. So the Rolling Stones, it was edgy, man. It was getting crazy as they're performing. They're watching them beat this kid to death. So they're an interesting group, but I'm proud to have had the opportunity to meet Sonny Barger, but I probably wouldn't run with the guy, okay? Nice fellow, though. He really was very pleasant and helped that boy write the best report he ever wrote in his life, I'll assure you. Okay, another contributing factor to violence in the 60s was music. So I'll tell you a little bit about music, and some of the more popular musicians that had drug lyrics and violent lyrics in their songs. We talked about one, Janis Joplin, also Jimi Hendrix, and also, as clean as we sometimes think they are, the Beatles. Okay? So 3 of the top musical groups that used drug lyrics and violence in their music were Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and the Beatles.
Are they on music in the 1960s?
Yeah. Yeah. They are on music in the 1960s, yeah. That's the subtopic, sorry, yeah. Now, anybody know anything about Janis Joplin? Anybody know where she came from? Obviously, she ended up at Haight-Ashbury, right? But where'd she come from? What state do you think she might come from?
Alberta.
Florida. Where would you least likely think she might come from? Texas. That's where she came from. She came from Texas. Matter of fact, she didn't fit in high school very well. She developed late. She was, to be honest with you, kind of a little bit of a homely gal in high school. Made a lot of fun of. By the way, she graduated with Jimmy Johnson, the coach of the Cowboys and Dolphins, and the Fox analyst was one of her classmates. Well, she didn't like high school very well, and so she got the heck out of there, and she went straight to Haight-Ashbury and lived there. And what was her job there? We talked about she performed what we call gigs here and there, you know, in coffee shops and bars, and pretty soon she put together her own musical group, which was called Big Brother and the Holding Company. I just happen to have a poster back there if you look underneath the Woodstock ticket. Big Brother and the Holding Companies, featuring Janis Joplin, holiday weekend concert, Sunday, November 10th at the Winchester County Center in New York. Okay, so she became pretty famous, and then she got her own group, Big Brother and the Holding Company. They did pretty well for a while. They played at Woodstock, by the way, and they also were invited to play at Madison Square Garden. If you're going to play at Madison Square Garden in New York, you've got to be a pretty good gig. So she, you know, became pretty popular, and her band, Big Brother and the Holding Company, also. Well, what happens when you are a member of a band, you sometimes become more important than the band, and the media makes you out to be something great. And so what happens, usually these people break off from their band, and they start a solo career. That's kind of what she did. She went out on her own for a while, and she even made an appearance, and again, my age is showing here, but she made an appearance on the famous Ed Sullivan Show. Now, you guys have no clue who that is, but I'll bet you if you asked your grandparents, they would all know who that is. That was a variety show that if you were an up-and-comer and you were wanting to get recognized, boy, if you could get on the Ed Sullivan Show, that was a big deal. You got invited to that. It was a variety show. She came on every